welcome to the Postmodern Iconoclast. This is a show that breaks down the false idols and icons of the postmodern digital age in search of a more authentic esoteric spirituality. Before we get into the episode, I'd like to talk a little bit about a really exciting thing that I'm hosting. I'm hosting a group trip to India with Trova Trip, where 8 to 24 people of my community will come with me to India for 7 days to see some amazing esoteric and religious sites. Registration is currently up. The first 8 people to sign up will get a major discount on the ticket, and the ticket includes everything but airfare, and you can pay over time. So that link will be in the description. You should definitely check that out, and hopefully, I will see you in India. Hello, and welcome to the show. This is your host, Georgina Rose, and this is the Postmodern Iconoclast. And in this episode, we have a returning guest coming on to discuss a recent, I would say, hot button topic, which is the issue with the Ram Temple thing. I've had people ask me about this online, and I've really wanted someone else to discuss it who knows a lot more that's going on. And I think our guest today will really explain it well and give people a lot of clarity because I think a lot of people have been seeing like random things on Twitter or random things on social media and not really known the context or background on what is happening. Before we get into what is actually happening, can you just introduce yourself so people know who you are, what your perspective is, and where you're coming from?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Sankrant Sanu, and lovely to be back on the show, Georgina. I have um, lived about half my life in the United States and about half my life in India, and I travel between the two. So I have a good perspective on both the East and the West. I was a tech entrepreneur and a technologist in the US, and then um, went deeper into studying cultural issues and the yoga tradition. I teach the Art of Living meditation program. And I also am very much interested in the indigenous issues and pagan cultures around the world. So, this is really the context by which this very significant event that has happened of the Ram Temple is relevant.
Yeah, so I guess the opening where this must start is, so what has happened recently? Like what's going on right now?
So I think there is a timeline and an event that is very significant. And firstly, we have to understand the context of Ram. Ram is a very central figure in Hindu tradition, and I wouldn't liken it to the Abrahamic figures like Jesus or Moses or Prophet Muhammad, but Ram, because it doesn't really translate well in the way the indigenous and the Hindu tradition works. But for us, Ram uh, as a deity of reverence and as somebody that ordinary people all across India relate to and Hindus all around the world relate to is very, very significant, perhaps the most significant figure. And our texts are very, they document the exact time and date of Ram's avatar, which is when the divine spirit descended on the planet in the form of Rama, and also the place where this happened. So there was a grand temple in this capital city of Ayodhya, and it's very interesting to note that Ayodhya is the city in India. There's also a city in Thailand by the name of Ayodhya, and the king of Thailand is also called King Ram. So the impact of Ram is all across Southeast Asia. In Indonesia, there's a big opera, which is the story of Ramayana or the story of Ram. In Cambodia, there are temples. So all across Southeast Asia, there was this reverence for Ram, and so for Hindus particularly, uh, this Ram has been a very, very central figure. And as we've seen in other places all around the world, when the Abrahamic religions invaded or conquered a place, one of the things that they did was they would destroy the most significant sacred places and they would construct their mosque or church on top of that. I was in South America in Peru, where there is the Cusco and there's a Sun Temple that was made by the Incas, and the church, the Inca temple was destroyed, and the Sun temple was constructed right on top of it. Similarly, this happened in Ayodhya, where the birthplace of Ram is. The temple for Ram was destroyed, and the mosque was built on top of it by Babur, who was an Uzbek Islamic invader, and this happened in the year 1528. There's plenty of documentation for it and archaeological evidence, other evidence. So that's the context in which this whole, the noise you're hearing on Twitter and other things was the for the very rare occasion where a pagan indigenous temple has been rebuilt and that spot has been reclaimed, and that's really the significance for really all indigenous people all around the world.
Yeah, so I think religions have, especially specific ones, they really do like do this frequently. Like even the Kaaba itself was right before Islam. It was a pagan temple. Like that's what that structure
Right,
was. And I think this impulse to build on top of previous religious temples is very much it's an iconoclastic impulse, and it's very much one of I feel like there's an assertion there when these Abrahamic religions did it, kind of a power move from them. Would
right,
you agree with
right.
that?
Absolutely. I think there's two aspects of Abrahamism that comes into play. One is their their injunctions against so-called idol worship. So uh, the fact that they have this notion, there's the whole story of the lamb, and the that was the calf, where they're worshiping the calf instead of God. Like there's the whole mythology around that. And so there's an impulse that comes from Abrahamism, which is twofold. One is that anybody who is doing that is worshiping the devil, and therefore there is something evil about having iconic images of other traditions. Of course, Catholicism, for instance, uses a bunch of iconic images, but they call them differently. They call them iconic images versus idols of the others. So what they see from their point of view, it is these are superstitious, idol worshipping pagans, and it is their religious duty to destroy those places. So that's the first part of it. And the second part of it is this notion that uh, this is our God, the Christian God or the God of Muslims, Allah. And therefore, to destroy the temple of another deity is a sign of the supremacy of their God over the indigenous tradition or the indigenous deity. And this is what we see, it's littered all across South America, and in many places in the Middle East. Now, the interesting thing happens is when Islam and Christianity itself conflict, or within the Abrahamic system, there is a conflict. For instance, in Spain, once the Moors were driven out, then there was the part of the Reconquista. Almost all the Islamic places were reclaimed and turned back into churches or otherwise. Similarly, when in Istanbul, if you go, I visited the Istanbul Museum, you will see they have a whole list of places that were formerly churches, including the famous, Hagia Sophia, um, that were then converted into mosques, and they proudly display that list. The only reason they don't proudly display it in India is because they're in a minority position, so they can't completely assert the supremacy of the fact, hey, yeah, we destroyed it and we are proud about it. It's it becomes a little bit of a dance.
Yeah, so I've noticed, with this situation, there've been a lot of people really freaking out and saying that like this is like unprecedented, this has never happened before. But I mean, this has kind of just been happening for all of religious history, I feel like. Do you think that rhetoric that they're using, like why do you think that's kind of capturing people?
I think the one way it is unprecedented is that there have been very few instances in history where the Abrahamic structure is rolled back and pagans have reclaimed it. So there is talk about that happening in Europe. I know in Greece there is some neo-pagan movements, in other places in Europe. And so there's a there in Ireland. So there is a little shoots of this coming out again, where people want to reclaim their original pagan traditions. But there has been very rarely an event in recent times where an Abrahamic structure that had been built on top of an indigenous structure has now been reclaimed by the indigenous. So that is quite significant, and I think it's significant, really, and very heartening for all the pagan traditions of the world, that this has happened.
So, in a sense, do you think that there's a deeply spiritual component to this? Like, is this kind of returning towards paganism that this event kind of signifies? Like, do you think there's a spiritual dimension to that?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is a very, very important event from on a spiritual basis. One of the important things about Ram is that Ram there are many dimensions to Ram. There is Ram, who is considered the one, the divine essence is Ram, and then there's Ram as the avatar, which is a specific king that is present in a particular time in history, and there's the Ram, which is the sound, which is the mantra. So Ram itself is a very, very powerful mantra, and in fact, Tulsidas, who wrote the Ramcharitmanas, the story of Ram, which is one of the most popular versions in the 15th, 16th centuries, also speaks about, the mantra Ram is bigger than Ram. So the name of Ram is bigger than Ram, which is meant to say that chanting on that mantra is very can help create transformation in people. So the return of Ram, in the sense of the significance of the establishment of the Ram Murti, which is what the Vigraha is how we call it in Sanskrit, Murti. Murti means the form. So we are using a particular form. And then the ceremony that just happened on January 22nd, it's called Pran Pratishtha. Pran Pratishtha is when you have the stone form, the Murti that is sculpted by somebody, and then it is imbued with prana, which is, so on the chanting of the mantras, the deity is invited to reside in that. And so all of there's a whole ceremony that happens. And in fact, um, Modi, Prime Minister Modi was the yajaman, the person who was actually conducting the ceremony, and he fasted for 11 days. There's a whole schedule he has to follow, ritual he has to follow, to actually be able to channel the energy, so that the energy in that stone uh, form is then imbued with the prana of Rama, so Rama starts to reside in it. So it's very, very significant for really the whole world, which is in some senses the return of Rama in an embodied form again.
I've noticed that the media has really kind of demonized Ram and kind of made specific expressions and statements related to Ram into something that they've called like offensive or bad. Like, what are your thoughts on that whole thing?
I think it's just so much distortion. It's absolutely insane, the level of distortion that has happened. There was even now one of the prominent archaeologists, K.K. Muhammad, who was responsible for this, for the dig, or involved with it. He's actually a Muslim, and he said that the leftist historians have so distorted the actual facts, and that they actually, the something that could have been a much simpler resolution, because the facts are more or less undisputed, that there was a temple of Ram, it was destroyed, we've seen this pattern over and over again. And so for Hindus this was a very sacred spot, and there's actually over 40,000 temples in Hindu temples in India that were destroyed, and out of those they really said these three are very significant for us, even though the Hindus are in a majority, they're 80% of it. They didn't just go and massacre people and claim the place. It actually went through a complete legal process where the court weighed evidence, and the leftist historians, which ironically were literally employed by the Islamists, by the Muslim board, uh, in court under cross examination, they said they hadn't even visited the place and they weren't even trained in archaeology. So but they still had put out this narrative that this is a hoax and there was no temple there, and this is just big bad Hindus just taking over a mosque. And that is unfortunately the narrative that the Western press has picked up, and that's the one that is being peddled, which is saying that for no for some bizarre reason, Hindus decided that this particular mosque needed to be taken when they had no connection to it. There was no temple, there was nothing of that sort. But if that's really the case, I mean, there are 40,000 other mosques in India. Why did these crazy Hindus not go destroy every other mosque? So it there was a specific site, it was a sacred site, and it's very significant for Hindus. And this is why there was a 500-year battle to reclaim this.
Yeah, so throughout this, 500-year battle, has it gotten ever really heated at certain points? Like, has it had, really hard, difficult moments in it?
Absolutely, absolutely. If you 1528 is when the mosque is destroyed, and you have to remember that India was under Islamic rule at that time. So Hindus had been defeated. So it was very difficult to actually rebuild the temple under those circumstances. But from 1751, when the Maratha power, which was a Hindu power, started becoming strong again, that's when the Marathas started to first make a claim and start to reclaim that spot. And then the first recorded conflict happened somewhere in around 1853, and then the Sikhs were the Nihang Sikhs actually went and captured the place for reestablishing the temple of Ram there. And so over and over again, there have been different phases of this. And then of course India came under British rule, and then there was a suit that was filed under British rule to reclaim the temple through the British legal system that was ruling India. This was happening in 1885. And then even after independence, there's been a constant struggle and through the legal system to get back this site.
Do you think that as this site changes hands, that there will be like, maybe even like violent pushback? Like, is there fears of, stuff like that happening?
Well, I think to the credit of the Muslims in India, I think even after the court judgment happened, and afterwards, there has been only very sporadic violence. There hasn't been any big one. I mean, one of the important things to realize is that this site itself has almost no significance to Muslims per se. It's just like any other mosque out of 40,000 mosques, right? So it's not that it was like a contested holy site where it was really important for them. It was really important for Hindus as well. So therefore, many reasonable mediators and other people said, "Hey, this is not so important to you. Why are you hanging on to this?" In fact, they were offered, and finally, even in the court judgment, Muslims were given a huge piece of land not very far away from the site in the city of Ayodhya to rebuild a mosque. So that even though Hindus have reclaimed their site, they said, okay, we mean no disrespect. You're free to build a mosque nearby, except this particular site is considered by us as the birthplace of Lord Ram, which was the temple, and so we would like that back.
That's crazy because I haven't really seen much like, stuff that I've looked up that's discussed that they were given like basically another site like in exchange. That seems kind of like a trade of sorts, right? Like that
Yeah,
seems
absolutely.
fair.
Absolutely. They were in fact, said that there's a site in exchange, and in fact many Hindus have even contributed to the building of the mosque on that site. So it was done over many years, very respectfully, many petitions, and many people even went to the very very senior the monks or very senior religious leaders of the Hindus went and said to the Muslim leadership, uh, this is not of great significance to you. Please let us have this back. But there was a section of the Muslim leadership for that were obdurate, precisely because of its significance to Hindus, even though it's not significant to Muslims per se, but because they were able to lay claim to something which was hugely significant to Hindus, that was a sign of supremacy. So for those supremacists among them, it was difficult to let go of that conquest. That was really the only significant item. But as I said, there's a 5 acre parcel of land, and there's already a plan for a grand mosque which is in Ayodhya as well, near the site of the temple.
Do you think that like these people who are really hanging on to it and have these kind of more, those type of opinions, do you think they're kind of influencing the like media and online discussion? Because I feel like it's been, from what I've looked at, very slanted
Yeah,
against certain parties.
I think that there are two factions that have influenced the media discussion. One is the kind of Marxist forces in India, and you have to remember India actually has a official Communist Party, which contests elections, and also has it's mostly been on the decline, but it still rules a significant state in India. So, but a lot of the academia in India had been under the control of the Marxists, and the Marxists, for whatever reason, have had this Faustian bargain or this alliance with the Islamists. We've seen this happen in Iran, where the left aligned with the Islamists, and after that they were actually slaughtered when the Islamists actually took over. But in other places, you will find that the leftists often are supporting some of the fundamentalist Islamic positions. And so one of the reasons for the bad coverage in the West is that, one is, I think, I won't even blame the West so much, is that a lot of the discourse is driven by the Indian leftists who are in media and in academia, in the South Asian studies programs in the US and other places. And the second part, of course, is that the Islamic point of view has also been kind of showcased in we'll see that in other disputes as well. So I think that's one of the reasons. But one of the reasons that it was important for us to have this discussion is that, at least for the indigenous people and those who are interested in pagan traditions, those who are looking to revive the pagan traditions, those who feel connected to the deities of our old gods, for those people, I think the significance of this has been missed because of that kind of media coverage.
Yeah, what do you think, like, you know, polytheists who are outside of like, the East, like, how do you think we should think about this stuff? Because I've seen, not actually from us, like not a huge amount of discussion, which I've found interesting. Like, what significance do you think it should hold for like us and how we should be talking about it?
Sure, sure, absolutely. I think one of the reasons why there hasn't been this discussion is because, as you pointed out, the media coverage has been very slanted, so people actually don't know exactly what's happened or what's happening. The media coverage has generally been, oh, big bad Hindus are bullying poor minority Muslims, and look how terrible it is, right? That's more or less the gist of the coverage, and Modi bad guy. But I think there's much more subtle nuance in there, rather than that positioning.
That's really interesting. Throughout that legal battle, was it like constant, like nonstop, or was it kind of like something that went on and then stopped and then came back?
I think it was like, there was definitely like in some sense, the battle was, of course, continuous, but from the public engagement with it went on and off a little bit, because the public, of course, always has limited attention span. So it became more and more a public movement, I would say, in the 1990s or so. And this is where it did get politicized some, because one of the parties, which is currently ruling, the BJP, made this one of their elements of their campaign to restore the Ram temple. And I think that's another reason why there is so much sort of negative press in the West because of it, because that cause became politically linked in the mind of the outside observers. But to imagine that the BJP created this Ram Temple movement is very silly, because if anything they leveraged, they used it. Obviously they used it because this was something that was a long simmering, deep feeling for, in the Hindus. And so any other party could have also said, hey, we will work to resolve this issue. But they ended up taking that platform, and obviously they had benefited from that.
Do you think that that politicization was the thing that catapulted it into being realized, or do you think the politicization kind of harmed the movement in getting their eventual goal?
I think it was a little of both. I think having it be political also allowed it to, because all of these are shaped by power. Without power, it is very difficult to change things. I mean, we've seen the fate of the Yazidis with the ISIS or any of that. And what we find is that finally one has to accumulate some amount of political power, and that's another lesson for the polytheists and pagans across the world, actually, which is that at some point it's not that we want our inner work to become political, but if we want to have claim to the external symbols of that, then we will have to be a block.
That makes a lot of sense. Was there before, like, it solidified as a movement? Like, has this been a desire of Hindus ever since it was overtaken, or, is it
Yes,
more a
yes.
desire that solidified?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's as I said, it's been a 500-year struggle, and just the fact that there is a civilizational memory of a 500-year-old struggle, and the fact that Hindus really never gave up on it. And as I said, even during the British times, when we were being ruled by the British, that demand was still being made in courts. Even in Islamic times, you couldn't really ask for it, but there was the battles, that were being fought. So it is something that has been always there. And I said, Ram is immensely significant all across India, from the north to the south and the east to the west. You'll have so many people named Ram. You'll have people named Ramakrishna. So many of the parents name their children after Ram, and the devotion to Ram is really a pan Indian and really a pan Southeast Asian phenomenon. So, in that sense, yes, this was always something that was there. In fact, there are three significant holy places. There are three major deities in the Hindu pantheon. One is Rama, the other is Krishna, and the third is Shiva. So there are three of these places that were destroyed, and there is actually now ongoing dispute that has been happening on the other two places as well. And the Hindus have really uh, been asking in a spirit of brotherliness from the Muslim leadership, saying there are 40,000 temples that were destroyed and mosques were built on top of them. We are not even asking for 40,000; we are just asking for three, because those three are extremely significant to us, and we are willing to compensate you, in however you say. But those three are the places that we would want back, which are associated with Rama, with Krishna, and with Shiva. So there is the Mathura temple, which is associated with Krishna, and then there is the the Vishwanath temple, Kashi Vishwanath temple, which is associated with Shiva.
What do you think will come out of those disputes? Do you think they'll go similarly? Do you think they'll, raise tensions, or do you think, this is just like kind of coming off of this momentum and they might not, be carried out? Like, what do you think will come out of those new
Well,
discussions?
my hope is that the sooner those disputes get resolved, the better it will be, because as I said, those places don't hold any particular significance for Muslims at all. It's not like, the Alaska dispute in Palestine or any of that, where two different religions both claim that this is super important to them. Those places have almost no significance for Muslims, other than the fact that it was a sign of the supremacy of the invaders, that they destroyed, very significant places for Hindus. So my feeling is that, that at least some enlightened Muslim leadership will emerge in India that will say, this is not significant to us. This is very significant to our Hindu brothers. Why don't we accept, their contention, and accept another place or a piece of land where we can build a mosque uh, at a different place, because those mosques are not of much value. But if that doesn't happen, then of course it is going to get more contentious, and will it'll possibly lead to more friction. But after the Ram Mandir has been done, I think this should hopefully pave the way for the other disputes to be resolved as well.
Makes sense. How long do you think it'll take for the kind of tensions around this Ram temple to subside and kind of, leave, the mental attention span of people?
Well, I think from the point of view of most Indians, it's not. I think the tension is mostly something that is a projection in the Western media. For most of people in India, including many Muslims, it's a moment of great joy. It's like, already this has become one of the biggest pilgrimage sites. I think several million people have visited it in a course of just a week or so. So this is going to become a huge, huge pilgrimage site, perhaps even the biggest in the world. So, and and the kind of devotion and emotion and sentiments that people are exhibiting. I mean, I'm here in Seattle actually these days, and I went to a local temple, Hindu temple, and this was for the day where the pran pratishtha, the imbuing of the statue with prana, was happening. And that was, it was just like packed. The whole temple was, I've never seen people, so many people in the temple. It was spilling out outside. And so just the kind of feelings and emotions and sentiment that have arisen, it's extremely joyous. And it's not at all, it's really not about anybody else. It's not about the Muslims. It's not for the Hindus. It's like our Lord has returned home, Lord has come back. So it's very beautiful event.
So, what do you think this means for the Hindu religion and community going forward?
Well, I think it's definitely, as I said, it's definitely a case of a revival, and it's definitely a case of great joy, and I think it will it will connect even more people more deeply with the tradition. So I think it's something that, and also, as I said, I think it's significant for the whole world, because Rama, in some senses, imbues that quality of somebody who's dedicated to raising human values of, of loyalty, of sticking to one's word, of benevolence, of being a benevolent ruler. And Ram Raja is a term that is used, which is ushering the period of prosperity on the planet, which is the rule of Rama, means that it's a place where there is no lack, and there is justice, and people are taken care of. So in that sense, I think it's very significant for Hindus, because it kind of feels like this is ushering in an era of prosperity, not only for India or for Hindus, but for the entire planet.
That's really beautiful. Um, what is it gonna look like once everything's like truly like what is like in a positive way, like what is this temple going to be like? What is the community around it going to be like? What beauty are we bringing in? Because I think that's a
Sure,
nice.
sure. Yeah, I think it'll be nice. Maybe you can share some pictures of the temple. You'll find many online. So it's built in classic Hindu sculptural style, and a lot of artisans have been associated with it. In fact, some Muslim builders have also been involved in building parts of the new Hindu temple, and which is, in India, this is the way it is. There's actually a lot more cross mingling than people imagine when they think of it from the outside, because from the ordinary people's point of view, like many of the Muslims in India are actually people who were Hindus who were converted. And if you talk to Muslims in Uttar Pradesh or in Agra, I mean in Ayodhya, where the temple is built, they have similar feelings for Rama as their neighboring Hindus do. So in many ways, I think it's a beautiful site to visit, and it's a beautiful pilgrimage site for Hindus, which was revived, and it's a gorgeous architectural marvel. So I would say anybody who's thinking of visiting India and putting Agra or the Taj Mahal as their destination spot should definitely include the Ram Temple in their itinerary.
So, do you think that the Western media will ever change their sort of pitch about these Hindu issues? Because I've noticed this is pretty consistent, right? They kind of use it as a wedge, right? And they cover it in a way that's pretty dishonest. Do you think that's ever going to change?
I think it will change eventually with power, where, if you look at, it's very interesting to see how China is covered, even though China is literally the biggest threat to the West in many ways, but it's covered much more positively than India, simply because China is more powerful at this point of time.
Yeah, it is strange. I have noticed that. And I think there's also a thing that people do specifically with yoga where here in like America, I think we've really divorced it from spirit. Like it is still viewed as part of spirituality, but like in a very I don't know, I feel like it's been very much reduced to like stretching and wellness and have been
Right.
removed from religion in a way.
Right, right, definitely. And in fact, I wrote an article long time ago called "Is Yoga Hindu?" You might look that up. It's on Rediff. And what I point out that is that yes, definitely. I mean, the challenge here is that Hindu traditions and the yoga tradition, in its drishti, in its gaze, is very universalistic. It doesn't actually require anybody to convert. It doesn't say that you can't practice it, you have to be sign up to a particular flag or be in a particular religion. So in that sense, it's very open, and that's in the tradition itself. But at the same time, if one can at the same time, it is a fruit of the tree of the Hindu tradition. And if you continue to take the fruit while attacking the roots, and that's firstly karmically not very good, and secondly, that's going to be losing a treasure for the world, because you want to nourish the roots that actually produce that fruit and will produce many more fruit as well.
That makes a lot of sense. I definitely feel like that's quite true. So the next thing I wanted to kind of ask you about is for Hindus. Obviously, this is incredibly important. What stage of the process is it in right now? Because I think that's a thing people might not be sure about. Like where is it in its development?
Sure, sure. So there was, in 2019, there was the court verdict that allocated the land to Hindus, and so it's been about four years since then uh, that the temple has come up, little less than 4 years. And so the temple is constructed, and now the significant event, which is the pran pratishtha ceremony, which is the imbuing of the deity's power, has been concluded. And this is something another thing, by the way, that all the polytheists and pagan traditions of the world can benefit from, which is that from the Hindu point of view, uh, every tradition, every place, every village even has their own deity. So Hindus have no need to say the whole world has to bow down to Ram or anything like that. We don't have that point of view. We say, every place that you're from, that you're in, has their own deity, has their own way that they approach divinity. And even from a polytheistic point of view, we see that we have both the unitary as well as the poly idea. So there are all these deities, but we also have the notion they're all part of the one divine consciousness and one divine energy. So for people who may be anywhere on the planet, in Ireland or in Poland or any place else, they could possibly learn from or um, have that this notion of the consecration, which is what are the specific mantras or rituals or systems that are used to imbue that power of the deity in a particular place, and recall the worship that has been lost. Because I think many of these things, if I look at the ancient Greek ceremonies and rituals, pre-Christianization, there is so much commonality between what the Hindu tradition has and what they used to have. And Hindu tradition is one of the only ones on the planet that was unbroken for 5,000 years or more. So I think in that sense, it's really something where all of the pagan polytheistic traditions can learn from, not to become Hindu, but to revive their own traditions.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I've tried to say to people. Like I think, we are not the same, like, as a Western polytheist, we're not the same as
Right,
Hindus. I think there's a lot of, inspiration we can see, and it gives us, an example of what a continuous, polytheistic tradition does look like.
right.
And I think that it's quite a beautiful thing. And I think, there are these people who, decide to instead become Hindu or whatever, but you don't have to be Hindu to see worldviews as compatible. Does this make sense?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. You don't have to become Hindu, because it's the tradition, especially for people, especially for people who are reviving their own polytheistic traditions. I think working on that is more important. Like if somebody was, I face this dilemma sometimes when I teach meditation in the United States, for instance, and there might sometimes a student would come up to me and say, I want to become Hindu, and they'll usually be coming from like a very strict Christian background, or sometimes a Muslim background, and for them, it's easier for them to go from one identity to another identity. It's easier for their own transition in their own mind. So I think in that case, it's perfectly fine, and we welcome that. But I think for people who are reviving these very nascent, budding polytheistic traditions, the most important is to invest in understanding their own tradition, and the Hindu tradition can act as a catalyst, or as an exemplar. I'm looking for the right word, something that or even a model, like you can look at that and say, oh, we must have had things like this. So how do we borrow in a graceful way, and in an interaction way, in something where you can have a respectful teaching, or an understanding, or a borrowing even, where you invite some of those people and say, okay, this is the ceremony we want to do, please help us in this, or how do we do this. So there can be an exchange of that, but the focus should be on reviving their own polytheistic traditions.
I think that's really well said and really beautifully put. I think that's a great place to kind of conclude this conversation. Um, is there anything else that you think people need to know about the situation, or do you think we've kind of covered it?
I think that's most of it. The most important thing to also realize that I came to, the closer I got to issues, the closer I realized that media is actually misrepresenting many of the issues, and actually pushing certain narratives that they want us to see for whatever reason. So I would open up dialogues with people, in the polytheistic community or elsewhere, and just start to actually talk to real people, like we are doing here. And I commend you for this platform also, because I think that having that dialogue and talking to real people will help us understand this way more than some ideological rant in a newspaper.
No, definitely. I think, we need more conversations and more dialogue and less ideologue dialogue. You get what
Right,
I mean?
exactly. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so where can people find you? Where do you exist and what do you do on the internet?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter. My handle is at Sankrant, Sankrant. So you can find me there. Twitter is a very good way to interact with me. I'm quite active there. I also run a book publishing house called GarudaBooks.com. In the US, it's called Garuda.us. That is bringing, Indian Hindu traditions and other indigenous traditions, yoga tradition, many other things. And if you want to write for us, you can also submit a book proposal. We're happy to showcase people who are pagan writers from and indigenous writers from all across the globe as well.
Lovely. Thank you so much for your time. I have been your host, Georgina Rose. This show is supported through Patreon. So if you join the Patreon, you get all of these episodes early. You get my bonus mini pre show with every single episode, and you get a bonus episode 8 times a year. And if you're a high enough tier, your name does get read out at the end. So thank you to Yasmin, Gray, Abka, John, Brennan, Thomas, Rob, Michael, Neva, and Mark. Thank you for your continued support. You guys keep the lights on, and you guys are very, very cool. You can find me, Georgina Rose, on every platform under the sun. And I will see you all in the next one. Have a good night, afternoon, mid morning, mid afternoon, whatever time it is, wherever it is you are.